welcome. And sorry you didn't look at the book, so let's see who you are. Please stand up and speak nice and loud so I can hear you. And where are you? I know we have a guest here. Come on, who are you? Well, I guess whoever it is too shy. Over there. Oh, great. Hi.
John Roberts. I met John Nagy through a neighbor's house that was working on it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming. Also would like to welcome a new member this evening, Thomas Westholme. Thomas, where are you? Congratulations, and we're very glad to have you. Please, everybody, welcome. Going to pass a paper around for a trip to the Financial Museum. David Cowan is in charge of that, and I understand it's very interesting, and I'm going to try and get a group of at least 20 of us. And that way we can have it like a minibus and a driver that will take us in. It'll be a very nice thing to do, I think. And I haven't picked a date, but I'd like to find out who's interested, and I will, as soon as I talk to David, find out what day would be good, and I will get back to all of you to see, you know, what dates would be good for you too. So I'm going to pass this around, and please sign it if you're interested. Now, I'm feeling kind of icky this evening. Good, we got a signer. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to my friend, Rich Rosenthal, and I'm going to go sit down. So thanks very much, and here's Richard.
Harry's going to the announcement first.
Well, hi everybody. For those that we haven't met before, I'm Harry Carpenter, and I'm so thrilled with what's going on here at the American Revolution Roundtable under the leadership of Jeannie and right over here, great work of the Civil War Roundtable. I had a little bit involved in both of them, and it's just wonderful to think that years later we're getting these terrific turnouts, and God bless all of you. Now, at this particular time, I'm the president of the Washington Association. That noble organization was started back in 1874 and bought the Ford Mansion, and later on bought all the land but at Jockey Hollow, and was involved in constructing these museums that we have today. And each year we have a annual meeting, and it's on Washington's birthday. And this year it's Monday, of course, February 20th, and we hold it at the Madison Hotel, right behind Rod's, for those of you who know that. And it's a beautiful dining room and a terrific occasion. And we have great speakers. 2 years ago we had Governor Kane. Last year we had Jim Reese, who's the executive director of the Mount Vernon, Washington. And this year we're having a great guy, Dr. Ray Fry. There he is. My Lord, would you please stand up, Ray? Ray Fry. And he, last year I had to miss the meeting here, which happened to be, Ray spoke here in March. When I came back, they said, Harry, you missed this bigger head. He was just terrific. Well, he's going to be speaking to us on Washington's birthday about the miracle in Philadelphia, the U.S. Constitution, and the extraordinary help and contribution of George Washington. So it's going to be a terrific occasion. It starts, well, we say social hour at 11:30, but everybody gets their noonish luncheon, and I'll have a few words to say, but the main man is Dr. Fry. So I've got with me some programs, and I'm going to lay on the back table, and any of you would like to consider coming, we'd be thrilled to have you. Inside it has a return envelope, and whether you have a choice of your meal, either meat or chicken or vegetarian, and it's just a terrific occasion. And you'll hear Dr. Fry, and we'll hope that several of you can join us. Thank you.
Actually, it's a great event. I've been here for the past few years through that. Let me just bring you, as I normally do, bring up announcements as part of our organization and what other organizations who are associated with us are doing. Number one is next month here, we're going to have Michael Adelberg, who will be speaking about the, lack of a better word, the Revolutionary War during the Revolutionary Civil War in Middlesex County between the Loyalists and the Patriots. Really a violent war that's going on. So he'll be coming up next month. April, we will have, mentioned before, we're going to have our annual symposium, and that's on Saturday, whatever that second Saturday or third Saturday. What's the 14th? 14th. This year's topic will be the ethnic groups as part of the American Revolution. Normally everybody does George Washington, does battles, but we're going to be doing the ethnic groups. Main speaker will be Mark Diana, who's a front page columnist for the Star Ledger. We've had him here before. He wrote the book on revolutionary sites in New Jersey, but he brings a strong feeling about being an American citizen. David Cowan, one of our members, is the head of the Museum of American Finance, and that's what Gene was just talking about. And he will be one of our speakers. Steve Stantucci will speak about the Italians. David Cowan speaking about Graham Sullivan, and Tom Fox, who's written the book, The Hidden History of the Irish in New Jersey, will obviously be speaking about the Irish in New Jersey. And I decided it'll be part one because we'll have, Kathy Fisher from Montville will be speaking about the Dutch through. It's going to be an interesting, different program that we've had. The Civil War Roundtable, 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have Joseph Bilby, who will be speaking about the African American soldiers from New Jersey in the Civil War. Two more things before I go. I mentioned this before, but now I will be passing out a list. On the first Saturday in May is History Day. We give out 2 awards for the Civil War Roundtable, 2 awards for the American Revolution. For the Civil War, those 2 awards are in honor of our own John Cunningham. And for the American Revolution, that's in honor of Harry Carpenter. Students will come from all over the state to participate in William Patterson University. And as I said, we give out the 2 awards. We would like you to be a judge on that day. It starts at 8:30 in Wayne. It's great to see 700 kids participating. These are the kids you don't read about. I always have a running joke, if the kid threw a rock through a window, you read about it. But 700 kids participating. And then we saw the caliber of these kids when they came here at our program. So I'll pass a list around. And by the way, you get a great lunch if it's any consolation to you. A mug, a t-shirt. I have a collection of mugs and t-shirts here. But we would like you to participate. Well, you may be interested, for you people down in Princeton, they will have the regionals. One will be on March 3rd in Princeton, another one will be in Ryder 2 weeks later. It'll give you a good chance to opportunity, and they have another semi-final. We don't give prizes, but we could be a general judge if you like, and I'll send you information about that. That'll be up here in Seton Hall. And I was just with Maxine Laurie about an hour ago, her husband Jonathan Laurie, who will be speaking at the Civil War. Maxine Laurie, who has come to our meetings, is the co-editor with Mark Madden, who has also been our speaker, head of they wrote the Encyclopedia of New Jersey History, and she's part of the New Jersey Historic Commission. That's why we were down there that day for the symposium. So maybe I'll give you some information. Please give up the day down in your area where they need help. Tonight's program is going to be a little unusual. We're going to have a triple header tonight. I'll introduce Kevin Tremble. We're going to run, like the movies, we're going to run a commercial. Not the American Revolution. That's basically, that's a great commercial. The second part of the series, the second part of the evening, we will have Jerry Horowitz who will do a community presentation. I mentioned before that if you're a member of our organization, or your organization is an organization, we will give you a 10-minute presentation. I should have mentioned Carrie Fellows, who's also one of our members, and they're having a great exhibit at McCullough Hall. So in any event, Kevin, are you going to speak about this first?
Just for a moment, yeah.
Okay.
And we're on art.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Tremble, president of the Crossroads of the American Revolution Association. We're responsible for developing the programs within the National Heritage Area in New Jersey. One of the first things we did was to develop a short series of video programs which introduced the larger story of the American Revolution in New Jersey to the public. And we did this, we prepared a 4.5-minute video overview. The story of New Jersey's role in the American Revolution in 4.5 minutes. Yeah, well, okay, we tried. That's all our budget was good for, but it's a start. So, but what we've done in addition is to put together 4 other 2.5-minute videos, one for Fort Lee, one for Washington Crossing, one for 1st and 2nd Morristown, and a 4th for the Battle of Monmouth. These 4 videos, along with the overview, are in place in those sites. There's one out here at Jockey Hollow, Fort Lee, etc. So, and there's one now currently at the Old Barracks Museum in Trenton because the Visitor Center at Monmouth Battlefield is currently closed for renovations. So, if you get a chance, you can look at all 5 of these out at Jockey Hollow, currently not functioning, so we're working out a little bit of the details. So when the weather gets a little warmer, go out there and enjoy it. But the point is, we're trying to link the other places of the story together so that there's a broader understanding. It's a complex story, 6 years of effort here in New Jersey. So this is our first step at that, and tonight, at Rich Rosenthal's suggestion, we're going to show the one overview, and hopefully you'll come back for episode 2, 3, 4, and 5. So with that, it's going to begin. We call it The Footsteps, and it's about New Jersey's role in the American Revolution. So I thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
These are the times that try and end the story. Thomas Paine.
With each footstep up a treacherous Palisades trail, British soldiers pursue a rebellious foe. A ragtag band of farmer soldiers in full retreat. In the fall of 1776, many believe the cause of American independence is lost. General George Washington's leadership is in doubt.
He is damnable deficient, General Charles Lee.
As Washington pushes and pulls the battered remnants of his army across New Jersey, little does he know that this state will be the staging ground for victory, that New Jersey will become the crossroads of the American Revolution.
No man, I believe, ever had a greater choice of difficulties. However, I cannot but think the prospect will brighten General George Washington.
Prospects would indeed brighten just weeks later, stealthily crossing ice-choked waters on a stormy Christmas night. Washington and his troops marched 9 miles through wind, rain, hail, and snow to a dawn attack on sleeping Hessian troops. It's a stunning success, which prods the British into a new respect for the rebels and a new strategy for the war.
All our hopes were blasted by that unhappy affair at Trenton. Lord George Germain.
But the road to independence will be long and hard. During 6 years of war, the Continental Army spends more days in New Jersey than in any other state. Enduring 3 harsh winters, including the worst winter in 100 years, they suffer bitter cold, scarce supplies, desertion, and disease.
The sufferings we endured are beyond description. No tent to cover us at night, exposed to cold that rains day and night. An American soldier.
Positioned between the new nation's capital in Philadelphia and the British stronghold in New York, no place in New Jersey is spared the ravages of war. Here, Washington and his commanders take advantage of mountain ridges, rivers, and swamps to foil the enemy. Here, they devise strategies that turn defeat into victory. Here, the largest field artillery battle of the Revolution is fought. Here, George Washington's troops prove equal to the military might of the British Empire. Here, a ragtag collection of men are transformed into a fighting force destined for victory.
The heart of the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Thomas Paine.
By the time victory is won, the fight for American independence touches every corner of New Jersey. Farms are raided, livestock seized, towns and churches are burned. Neighbor is pitted against neighbor, son against father.
The party acted against me in the late war is of public notoriety.
Benjamin Franklin. From the Palisades to the Delaware Bay, from the mountains to the shore, to every town, village, and farm, New Jersey is not only a crossroads on the map, it is a crossroads in the birth of a nation. Today, you can still catch glimpses of the landscape that gave Continental forces a strategic advantage. Step from nearly any doorway in the state and follow in the footsteps of history. This place, New Jersey, the crossroads of the American Revolution.
We watched the trailer of something we all know the end. Otherwise, we'll be in Cornwallis' house tonight. Our next presenter is Jerry Horowitz, and with him tonight is Kip Cherry from the Princeton Battlefield Society. This was one of the notices I did send out to you. There is a battle right now. Well, I'm not going to talk about it, but we think it's that important. And Princeton Battlefield are members of our organization right now. So, Jerry, you're on.
Okay, I'm going to start things off, and then Jerry's going to talk real briefly and quickly about the actual battle. So we're going to roll through this very quickly. I think all of you have your little membership form and your brochure about the battle. Essentially, we're on our second leg of the battle now. This is the battle to save the site of the counterattack from a development. Okay, you all know that the Battle of Princeton was on January 3rd, 1777, and that it occurred after Cornwallis had cornered Washington in Trenton, after the 2 battles of Trenton, and Washington marched his troops all night, the whole Continental Army, up to Princeton to elude Cornwallis. So while Cornwallis was sleeping, thinking he was going to have a big battle the next day, Washington essentially snuck out of Trenton, leaving bonfires behind so that Cornwallis would think that the Continental Army was still there. Okay, Jerry.
Okay, I always like to say that I think that the Battle of Princeton is probably George Washington's most brilliant campaign. Yes, he started out at Trenton and he beat the Hessians, but the British always said that it was a fluke, and the only reason he succeeded at Trenton was because he was up against the second team, those Hessians, and they were drunk to boot and badly led. and they could never do it against British regulars. So that's how they would spin the story of the disaster at Trenton. And here it is, Washington within a week comes back across the river and essentially sets himself down in Trenton, which had not been reoccupied, and basically invites the British to come and get him. And of course they do. They take the bait, and they're coming from Princeton, where Wallace comes down, and Washington delays him because Washington does not really have the strength to go up against the main British army. So he sends up Hand's riflemen and some artillery, and he slows them down. So by the time they get into Trenton, sun is going down, and this is all what he counts on. And the British unsuccessfully attack the bridge across the Assunpink Creek, and Washington is ready for him, repulses the 3 assaults, and then it gets dark. And Cornwallis says, I'm not going to do a night attack, it's too risky. And then Washington conceives of this idea to go around the flank of the British army, because it looks bad to retreat, he doesn't like to retreat, but this is a brilliant way of getting out of harm's way, avoiding annihilation by the British army the next day, and repeating what he did at Trenton, at Princeton. And so he undertakes this enormous risk right in front of the British army. Mind you, that the British the pickets are only 50 yards away. You can't necessarily fool people when you're moving 6,000 men in the middle of the night. People make noise. He has the bonfires going, but the British misinterpret what he's doing. It's a little bit like, I always call it the Stonewall Jackson moment, when Stonewall Jackson and Chancellorsville went around the flank of the British, went around the flank of the Union Army, and they saw him do it. But they said he's retreating. No, he was marching to go to their flank and attack them. So this was that brilliant move. They think that Washington is strengthening his right flank, not that he's moving his army all the way around. Well, who would do that in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the night, march 18 miles to go to Princeton? But that's what Washington does. Now, he doesn't have a snowstorm like he had at Trenton to mask his approach. He's got it all figured out. He's divided his army up. He has a diversionary force going. You can see that here. You see the forces over on the left going up the Quaker Road by the Stony Brook. You take the bridge, cut the bridge, and go down the main road. And then he's going to go to the back road, and while the British are focused down the main road, he's going to hit the garrison on the flank. Unfortunately, the British aren't where he thinks they are. They're not in garrison. They're on their way to Trenton because Cornwallis has ordered Mauchlet, the commander of the brigade, to bring everybody down to Trenton. So that road that he intends to do the diversionary assault is occupied by British soldiers, and they see him. They see American soldiers moving towards Princeton. And they don't know that it's the entire American army, but they know somebody is out to attack Princeton, and the reason you have this engagement, this meeting engagement, is because the British are trying to cut off whatever force it is that's attacking, looks like it's attacking Princeton. And they can't get back, so they have to try to cut the line that they can see. So, and this again is just purely by accident. Washington sees the British too, and he thinks it's a reconnaissance force. And he sends Mercer out. You can see from this, he sends Mercer out, and then Mercer runs into the British and is surprised and is overwhelmed. And then Cadwalader's men are routed. They're right behind Mercer. And so Washington's got a rout on his hands. And he has to go back and rally those brigades and bring in extra men. And this shows that climactic moment when Washington brings those men back in and also brings in a couple of other brigades over on the right and tries to do an encirclement of the British. You can see this. And he leads them in a dramatic counterattack. He leads from the front. He's in front of both lines. It's a volley fire. Many men think he's a goner, but he isn't. He just shows his leadership ability, and he leads the Americans in a counterattack that sweeps the British from the field. This is his first field victory over the British. It's extremely important in American history because he puts the lie to what the British said, that the Americans cannot beat the British regulars. He beats the British regulars here. He sweeps them from the field, and he has his first acknowledged victory. Not only that, he's humiliated the British because they think he's in Trenton, he's behind their lines, and not only is he behind their lines, he's closer to the main British supply base at New Brunswick, which is where he really wants to go. And if he had been able to get there, might have changed the whole war right at that moment, because the British payroll was in New Brunswick, and it was guarded by 100 men. But unfortunately, he had to fight this battle, which he won, and then he had to get out of town because Cornwallis is coming back from Trenton. But it's still an amazing story, what he did. He takes his army out, and of course he ends up coming up here to Morristown, ultimately, because he just doesn't have any fresh troops to take New Brunswick. The area that you're seeing here shows that the Institute owns quite a bit of the land where the battle was fought. But a critical stage, where number 2 on that map, is where they want to put houses. You can see it's literally in the heart of where the counterattack took place. It's where British and American lines are located, where the Americans literally broke through the British lines. And we have the artifacts of the battle are located right there in number 2. Broken bayonet, musket balls, grape shot, all the signs of a battle. And the Institute for years has denied anything happened on that site, despite the physical evidence. So we are trying to save this piece of American heritage. It has never been built on, it's farmed, it has been farmed up until recently, and the land is there. But if the Institute gets to do what it wants to do, there will be houses on that field. Not only houses, they will literally destroy the landscape. They're going to be putting down tons of earth to literally level the field. So this is what we are seeking to prevent. And we are right now locked in a battle in front of the planning board in Princeton. And next Thursday is the last hearing of it.
Okay, real quickly, our strategy has been to find ways to prevent the project by looking at the local ordinances and environmental issues. We hired an environmental expert, and they found wetlands on the property that had not been reported to DEP, so we're asking the DEP to reopen that issue. We looked at the sight lines, and it looks like you're going to be able to see this housing development right from the battlefield. This is Mulder's Battery, right in the middle of the park right now. This is the transparency between the park and the site. This is on the site looking back towards the park, and you see how the park goes up a little bit of a rise to where Mulder's Battery was. Here is the test fit for the cluster proposal. The housing development is going to be cluster, but under the ordinance, in order to get a cluster development, you have to show that you could put the site, the lots, into the existing site. And if you look at these little X's, those are all lots that we have found to be unresponsive to the ordinance. So we're saying you cannot build this project. So then they gave us another alternative, and the alternative, same thing, you can see all the X's, and including they want to build in the buffer, the historic buffer, and we're saying no, you can't do that. Here are the artifacts. You can see this ring of artifacts where the counterattack occurred. There was a major archaeological dig done by Hunter. The area where there is no cross-hatching has not been archaeologically surveyed yet, so we have much work to do, but you can see a lot of artifacts. And you can see the grape shot. Grape shot in this diagram. And then here is a figurative diagram showing the swath of artifacts. You see the site below those artifacts. This is the Simpsonville map that was done in 1944. This was given to the Institute for Advanced Study in 1944 when Governor Edge set up the park. Governor Edge wanted this property in the park, but he needed to get it from the Institute, and they did not want to provide it. Here is the park as it was originally envisioned by Governor Edge. And here you can see the site in the proposed park area. You can see the Simpsonville counterattack. Simpsonville was a little bit off. The counterattack was more to the east, we think, based upon the archaeological information and the original accounts. But he was close back in 1944. Here's you see the site, you see the counterattack, you see the park in green, and you see the Institute for Advanced Study off to the east. So our legal strategy has been to have a really fantastic team. We have a very good attorney who is a top litigator. And we have gone through our legal strategy, the historic background, the wetlands, the visibility, the cluster zoning requirements. There was a 1992 lawsuit. We are using that because in that lawsuit there were certain provisions, and we think that the proposal violates the provisions. The master plan, everything. We're just throwing the kitchen sink at this thing, and we have set up a legal defense fund, and we'd love to have all of you become members and contribute to our fund. This February 16th is our fourth session before the planning board. The planning board has been having special meetings just for us. The reason is that the Institute for Advanced Study is cooperating because they think we're going to appeal, which we are, if we lose. If we don't lose, then they're going to appeal. So it's going to be a battle no matter what. Thank you all.
Our next speaker, John Nagy, this is the third time he's been here. He's been one of our, let me start. John Nagy has been here 3 times, this is the third time. He was one of our first speakers when we started. I saw him, he was the head of the American Revolution outside of Philadelphia, actually. Probably one of the oldest groups around. John's originally from New Jersey. He still lives in Mount Laurel. He's a scholar and resident at St. Francis University in Pennsylvania. One of the things I think most exciting, periodically I'll watch something on television and say, hey, you know that guy? And it's John Nagy. One of his books was Mutinies of the American Revolution. Then he did one on codes where he was here before. And he'll probably tell you a story, but I'll tell it ahead of time because he said he taught the kids and he showed them how to use the code. I showed it to my grandkids, by the way, John. So they're now writing in code. So they're very thrilled with my daughter. But that's the exciting topic. And now he's back again for the 3rd time. Welcome again. While John's coming up, you'll see the book for the path for the judges. Please sign it.
The current book is called Spies in the Continental Capital, Espionage across Pennsylvania during the American Revolution. Don't blame me for the length of the title, blame Google. Publishers want to have everything possible that Google can find, so the titles are getting longer and longer. I asked the publisher, is my next book going to take up the entire front page? And he said yes. Okay, the 7 Years' War is known as the French and Indian War in North America. France and England signed a peace treaty in February 10, 1763, and naturally, immediately, they begin preparations for the next war. So, in that vein, the very first spy the French sent over is French Lieutenant Nicolas de Sarrebous de Pomeroy de Beaulieu. It's a mouthful. When I first started doing the research on him, I thought he was 3 people. Because I kept finding documents under each name. And I was very lucky, a number of years ago, on the anniversary of the Franco-American Alliance, I represented the French government as their speaker for the event at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. So I called up the French ambassador and told them I had a problem. They gave me the head of the French archives, who then went crazy trying to figure it out. And then he contacted me back and said, you got one person, and that's his full name, and he had documents in all 3 names. But he comes to Philadelphia to find out what's going on. The very next spy was in 1768. The French sent over Johann de Cobb. De Cobb has served in the French army. He's a Bavarian during the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War in Europe. He comes over to Philadelphia, and when he arrives in Philadelphia, he takes up residence in the house that's pictured on the screen. It's called a slate roof house, and if you know Philadelphia, it's where Frenchman Park is now on 2nd Street. The house torn down by 1868. He goes back and reports, by the way, turns in his report to France, decides he liked it here so much, he came back and moved here, and that he is the same American general to Cobb. The next one they send over is Julien Archard de Bonvalois, and he is sent by France as their emissary. They meet, he comes over as an unofficial emissary. He can't officially speak for the French government, but he does. He meets in the room that's in the upper left on the 2nd floor, which is the Library Company of Philadelphia and their bookstore. And he met Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson there. What's interesting is that whether you consider him an ambassador or you consider him a spy, it's hard to figure out, because if he's an ambassador, why do you meet with him in disguise? He's reported as being about 20 years older than he was, and about a year later, Congress orders him arrested as a spy, and apparently they must have figured out he was really an ambassador, or if he was a French spy. They dropped the case because it's not good to throw the ambassador or an agent of a government you're trying to get money from in jail. So the case just disappears off the record. In dealing with the intelligence war leading up to the American Revolution, another one of the people that the British send over, Gilbert Bartley, had immigrated to Philadelphia in 1755. He's here as a merchant for about 20 years, then goes back to Scotland. Then they sent him back as a spy to use his connections in Philadelphia. One of his very close personal friends was John Dickinson, and his job was to pump Dickinson and whoever else he knew to try and get intelligence. One of the things he was able to get a hold of was the actual plans for the Chateau de Frise that's in the Delaware River. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? No. Well, you want to explain it? How's that?
Oh, sure. Well, that's the underwater obstacle in the precast. Well, it was actually iron-tipped spikes in ribs of stone that were placed in the water to not so much to sink the ships, but to prevent them from passing in a certain way. And they had them in the Hudson River as well.
You notice how I get everybody else to do some of the work.
Chill.
Yeah. They've actually now, this past summer, found a second one of the metal-tipped poles that was used. There are now 2 of them that are in existence. One is at the Camden County Historical Society in New Jersey, and the one that's just been found will eventually wind up at the Philadelphia Seaport Museum, probably about sometime next year. Okay. Spies in Congress. Now, when the first Continental Congress is held, they meet at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, and they give their honor and pledge that they're going to keep everything quiet and away from the public as to what goes on in their meetings. So, naturally, immediately somebody's going to blab. And the one that does is Joseph Galloway. He is the political boss of Pennsylvania. And he's sending messages, letters up to William Franklin, the illegitimate son of Benjamin Franklin, who's the royal governor of New Jersey. He then forwards the messages over to the Earl of Dartmouth in London. We know it's him from several different sources. That is Galloway. One is that Galloway actually outs himself. Later on, William Franklin outs him. And so it's pretty definite that Galloway is spilling all the beans as to what's passing in Congress. one we're going to deal with is James Brattle. He was a trusted secretary to James Duane, who was a delegate from New York for the First and Second Continental Congress. There's the whole rigmarole that goes on in chasing Brattle around Philadelphia, which I outlined in the book. But eventually what happens is Brattle is discovered. He escapes while they're trying to actually find the documents, and he makes it back to New York. He had been sending his intelligence to a barber in New York City by the name of Leslie. Another source says the reports went to the owner of a small tavern on Broadway known as the Tryon Arms, and despite our best efforts and all the historians I could find that know New York City, nobody could figure out exactly where the Tryon Arms was or who actually owned it. But in most probability, he was sending them both ways, but eventually they wind up with William Tryon, the royal governor of New York, who then sends the intelligence on to London. An unnamed clerk of a merchant in the area of French Church Street, which we now in New York is called Pine Street, in December of '75 was receiving intelligence from the Treasurer of Congress. And how do we know it came from the Treasurer of Congress? Because he told us that's who we got it from. Now the only problem that we have is at the time it's sort of like you get co-signers on a check. There are two Treasurers of Congress. There is Michael Hilligas, who was the Treasurer of Congress from 1774 to 1789, and George Clymer, 1775 to 76. Now, which one actually turned the intelligence over? We don't know. I have not been able to figure out which one, other than it's one of the two individuals involved. Sorry about the screen. This was written with open source, and this is on a PowerPoint, so it shifts. The moles were expiring in Philadelphia. When the British arrived before they arrived in Philadelphia, they decided they need pilots who know the obstacles in the Delaware River. They sent Molesworth. Molesworth had been a clerk to the last two mayors of the city of Philadelphia. When the Declaration of Independence is declared, the office of mayor ceases until after the war. So Molesworth is out of a job. He goes back to New York. At New York, they send him back to Philadelphia. Now, being in the position he had been, he has many contacts in Philadelphia, because he was one of the power brokers in Philadelphia, having worked for the mayor. And he contacts Abigail McCoy of Union Street and Mrs. Sarah O'Brien of Front Street, also known as Delaware Avenue or Columbus Boulevard, if you get your choice. Their job is to help him identify and get a hold of sea captains to send back to New York. They do have several successes. They are able to talk some of the sea captains into going to New York to be pilots to bring the ships up the Delaware River. Now, one of the places the two women would go is a place called the Sea Captains Club, which when I found out about this, I went crazy because I had never heard of the Sea Captains Club in Philadelphia. And the Sea Captains Club is basically sort of like a helping aid to elderly sea captains who are down on their luck and what have you. And they meet at a place called the Hat and Arms. And it's called the Hat and Arms because Mrs. Hatton runs the place. It's a tavern. So these two women hang out at the tavern and try and entice the sea captains. How far the enticement goes, I'll leave that to your imagination. But they certainly do have success. They contact a couple others, and what happens is that the three of the captains decide they're not going to do the going to New York route. And so what they do is they contact the local Philadelphia police. They arrest Molesworth, and after I finish, and they also arrest McCoy and O'Brien. The other members of the Ranger is a guy by the name of Joseph Thomas, Luke Kent, also known by the name of alias 7th Street. 7th Street in Philadelphia was already out in the farms. Not so today. Joel Arkin, Hastings Stackhouse. Thomas Collins, who was the clerk to General Thomas Mifflin, was involved in Molesworth Spy Ring. And the other one that gets me is a Colonel John Henry Smith. Also, his real name is Joseph Arrowsmith. He's from the New Jersey militia in Hillsborough, Somerset County. Now why, and I'm still trying to figure this one out, why does a member of the New Jersey militia go by an alias? But what actually happens to this guy is that he is arrested as a British spy. Washington has to tell Joseph Reed, the governor of Pennsylvania, your people have arrested your own spy, because Joseph Reed is the one paying them, and that they have to come up with a plan whereby he escapes and then makes it back. He goes about 2 more years and then eventually is arrested again as a spy. But the Molesworth Spy Ring is operating in the spring of '77. Okay, Molesworth is given a trial. He is hanged on March 31st, 1777, placed in a potter's grave. When the British arrive, they dig him up and they put him in a regular cemetery. Mrs. McCoy, based upon her action, is convicted of treason. Mrs. O'Brien, there is insufficient evidence to prove that she committed treason. But that doesn't stop us, we throw them both in jail. We know they were guilty. British intelligence in Philadelphia operates the following way. Nesbitt Balfour was handling the Army. Francis Lord Rawdon was handling the Navy and their intelligence gathering operations. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Kimball of the 60th Regiment of Foot. And yes, that is the same Kimball family that's out here in Morristown. He had signed up into the regular British Army before the French and Indian, at the beginning of the French and Indian War, and stayed in the British Army service. So he is one of the key players in British intelligence, and operating underneath him, 2 case agents, is a Dr. Henry Stevenson, who was originally from Baltimore, and our friend Joseph Galloway is back when the British arrived in Philadelphia. Now he claims to have had as many as 80 agents, which is a total fabrication because he's writing this at the time trying to get money out of the British government. He had a few, certainly nowhere near 80, and probably just a handful. The American intelligence operation in Philadelphia. The way it operated, you had Major John Clark Jr. ran a spy ring that operated within the city limits of Philadelphia. You've heard about the Culper spy ring, and some people claiming them to be the first American spy ring. That is absolutely incorrect. The first American spy ring were the Mercer Roads on Staten Island. They were operating in 1776. Colonel Elias Boudinot, Captain Charles Craig, and Captain Alan McLean. And these are the individuals running the American spy operation in Philadelphia. There are other people operating underneath this. Now, if you're going to be a spy, why would you want to be a smuggler? Anybody?
You're already working in a shady situation.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, but there's another reason why you take on the mask of the smuggler. Yes, but why would you do that?
Money.
Money's for one, but what else? There's another overriding reason.
Reason for travel?
To some degree, but if you're caught as a smuggler, you're going to get about a 50-pound fine. If you're caught as a spy, what's going to happen? You're going to hang. So you always want to be a smuggler. much more advantageous to your existence. And so people going into Philadelphia would use the cover as being a smuggler. Matthias Tyson, a Mennonite from Bedminster Township in Bucks County, was arrested while smuggling butter and eggs into Philadelphia. And Colonel John Piper, the 1st Battalion of the Pennsylvania Militia, had a sense of humor. He had Tyson tied to a tree and allowed his soldiers and militia company to throw all his eggs at him until they ran out of eggs and then sent him on his way. So they do have some sense of humor now and then. Now this is called the Shambles. This is Head House Square as it looks in Philadelphia today. The original head house was at the south end, this is at the north end, and this building actually is about 1804. But behind it are what's called the Shambles. And the reason they're called the Shambles, they were basically booths for merchants like farmers to come in and set up. And you would have some farmers who would build a permanent structure, you know, with a shingled roof. Others would just use a tarp. Others would use whatever they had with all the holes in it. And others had nothing, and it looked like a shambles, which is the Philadelphia term for a farmer's market. And so the spies smuggling their produce into Philadelphia would go to the Shambles, set up, and look like everybody else that just smuggled all the stuff in, collect their intelligence, and go back out. They also collected their intelligence, according to what they tell us, is at the Quaker meetings in Philadelphia. Apparently they did a lot of gossiping. The Major John Clark spy ring in Philadelphia. Clark is a lawyer from York County, Pennsylvania. One of his first spies was a guy by the name of Cadwallader Jones, who's from Euclid Township, and one of the hardest things was figuring out how to pronounce that. And Jones originally had enlisted in the flying camp, and when they were being sent from Philadelphia up here to Perth Amboy, he decided he wasn't going and deserted. There was a bounty put on his head, and which is probably the reason why he agreed to be a spy, to get that bounty removed. We don't know that for a fact, but it's interesting. There's no mention of that bounty after he becomes a spy. The next one is William Dunwoody, and that drove me crazy for the longest time because he's from Newtown Square, where it seems like everybody is named Dunwoody. And for the most part, I never found his first name until on one document, out of about 50, somebody happened to write William. So finally he got his first name. Mr. Irving was a spy in Philadelphia, John Fox, and we'll talk about him in a minute. John Jacob, Mr. Trumbull, a woman with provisions, could not get her name, but she was stopped by an officer from the 1st Pennsylvania Militia while she was trying to smuggle in chestnuts. And when he stopped her, he told her that he would allow her to continue going into Philadelphia if she had agreed to have sex with him. Now, she did not complain, but her husband complained very vociferously to Washington. She was allowed to continue in Philadelphia with her chestnuts. Joshua Humphreys of Philadelphia. We know he was a courier, and I'm not sure if he really did anything other than that. Mentioned John Fox. This is an actual pass, a scan of the original document, which is in the Washington papers in the Library of Congress. And if you notice, it says headquarters, 20 November 1777. The bearer, John Fox, has the Commander-in-Chief's permission to pass the outpost without molestation to all concerned and assign Nesbitt Balfour aide-de-camp for the British Army. So here an American spy has his actual pass to go in and out of the British lines. And when the headquarters says you're not going to bother them, you better believe they're not going to stop them for any reason whatsoever. or they're going to be out doing duty in the swamps. This is the American Spy headquarters. The building still stands. It's the Lewis House in Newtown Square. It's a private residence. And the clerk used to hide out here and write up his reports and then go racing around the Philadelphia area. He would travel anywhere from 30 to 60 miles a day. He actually ran out and ran 3 horses into the ground. They couldn't keep up with him. But that's what it took him to get his work done. Now, I don't know if anybody here knows the Dara Story. Okay. You can't really think, if you get down to Philadelphia, you can't really do anything in Philadelphia without mentioning the Dara Story. There's some truth and a lot of fiction to the Dara Story as to what's been told so far. Currently, the story is that the British headquarters, which was at American General Cadwalder's house, which was right across the street from the Dara house on South 2nd Street, that when they needed extra space, they would come over and use the living room of the Dara house for their meetings. And Lydia would listen in and then send messages out through the use of putting the messages inside of the covers of wooden buttons. Now, I assume some of you have had a coat where the button is covered in fabric to match the coat at some time in your life. This was the fashion in Philadelphia at the time. So the messages would be placed over the wooden or bone or metal button and underneath the fabric. Their son John, who was 14, would take the messages out through the lines to his brother Charles, who was listed as Lieutenant Charles Dara, who would then send the information on to Washington. Now the story says that she overheard the messages, came racing out of Philadelphia, warned Washington about the British coming out, and because of that she saved the American Army for the Battle of White Marsh. Some of it's true, some of it's not true. Now we'll get to what is true. One of the stories is that, or one of the reasons the story is not, is because nobody could find a Lieutenant Charles Dara. Now, they've been going at this since 1828 when the story first appeared. I have found 2 muster rolls with Lieutenant Charles Dara on it. He did exist. I also found a court-martial where he is an officer sitting on the court-martial. So there definitely is a Lieutenant Charles Dara. It's interesting, he's only a lieutenant during the British occupation in Philadelphia, when apparently he needed to be able to move the messages and get around Philadelphia, the surrounding area. Now, the other complaint was that how could she get in and out of the lines? Well, we have actually a report from a Hessian general who's complaining about the fact the Philadelphia roads out to Frankfurt and to Germantown are completely open to anybody who wants to pass. And he's complaining about the fact that there really are no British defenses on these 2 roadways. So there's no question she or anybody else could get out during the day. Also, children basically were never stopped going in and out of Philadelphia. So John would have not had any problems going in and out of the lines. Now, another thing is that nobody's ever found a Dara document. And in going back, I always go back to the original report of the spy that I can find. In this case, it was an 1828 telling of this Dara story, and 1 or 2 later versions. Well, I realized that the modern versions are saying Lydia's doing it, but in the early versions it says that her husband is the one who's actually transcribing the messages. She may have heard it, but he wrote the messages. So, the other part of the story says the messages came out through Frankfurt to a Captain Craig, who we saw earlier. I looked and tracked Captain Craig, and he's in the right place. He's at Frankfurt for the end of November and the beginning of December. Battle of White Marsh is the beginning of December. So Captain Craig is in the right place. And I, crazy enough, I decide I'm going to go look and see if I can find the Dara document, even though people have tried for 180 years and can't find them. Well, in amongst the George Washington papers, on December 3rd is a report that identifies that it came from WD in Philadelphia, William Dara. So there actually is a Dara spy document that exists. Now, part of the story was that she warned Washington and then saved the army. False. Washington's Clark spy ring had already been telling him for a number of days that the British are coming out en masse. They came out with 10,000 troops. Her intelligence would have only confirmed what Washington already had through Clark's spy ring. So yes, she probably did all that it's claimed, but it was just confirming other intelligence that Washington had. So that's the Dara story. Oh, by the way, that is a picture of the actual house. There is in the Temple University archives a photograph of the house that exists. The only problem is the photograph, the second floor is obscured by a white tarp. But this drawing was made at the time the house is still standing.
From the close, it's about 1825, 30.
So William Dara, her husband, was a school teacher, and this is all what I just told you about. Now, one of the stories that I found, which has never been known before, about Washington's plan to burn Philadelphia, or part of it, as a deception. I found out about a letter in a county archives in England that reported on the capture of an American spy. So after paying a princely ransom, I was able to get a photocopy of it. It cost me like $30 to get the photocopy. Not to publish it, just to get the photocopy. And it gives me all the information. It told about a American deserter who went over to the British. He's just being held at one of the readouts. They weren't finished deposing him as yet. And he observes a woman who he has seen the previous day at Washington's headquarters turning in a deposition. She is arrested. She had some type of message in her hair, which she threw in the fire. It's the winter time, which obviously convicts her right then and there. But it never gives the name. And tells about the plot Washington had to burn what was known as the New Tavern, which goes by several names. The New Tavern, Smith's Tavern, or the current name of the building is the City Tavern, which is now reconstructed as the house business that operates in Independence Park. And he was going to burn that, and he was going to burn the theater that was on Cedar Street, which is now known as South Street in Philadelphia. With those two buildings burning, it would have drawn in the soldiers from the outlying area. Washington had been getting detailed information from the spy network about the Market Street Bridge as to when it's up, when it's down, which way it actually falls. All I can figure is that his plan, once the fire was going on, he was going to come over the Market Street Bridge. When he did that, he would be right behind 3 British redoubts with all the defenses facing in the other direction. He would have been able to take them with no problem. Because all the soldiers have been facing the wrong way. And so then I start working on trying to find out who this woman was. I go back to the Washington papers and look up the day before she was arrested, and there is a deposition from Ann Myers of Philadelphia providing intelligence that she was bringing out from Philadelphia. So the woman involved in the case is Ann Myers. So this is how some of the stories get put together. A document in Washington and a document in England. Samuel Wallace is one of the longer running spies. He starts off in the beginning of the war. for the British. He lives in Philadelphia and in Muncie, Pennsylvania. And he owns 7,000 acres up in Muncie, which is near Williamsport. And he continues operating through 1781. He is not found out until the 1940s. They never caught him. We all think, most of the spies are Americans or British. How about a Spanish spy? And the Spanish spy who was sent to Philadelphia is a wealthy Cuban merchant by the name of Don Juan de Morales. He is sent there by the governor of Cuba. They fake a necessary landing in Charleston, and while his ship is supposedly being repaired, he takes off for York, Pennsylvania, where Congress is at. He continues operating as a Spanish spy until Spain enters the war, and at which point he immediately becomes the Spanish ambassador. One way to get a quick promotion. He actually dies here in Morristown from an illness. Two spies in central Pennsylvania, William Rankin, also goes by the code name Mr. Alexander, and Dr. Henry Norris. Henry Norris is sort of a lunatic. They are constantly finding him and trying to keep him out of trouble, and he manages to keep putting his feet in his mouth every chance he gets, till eventually they get sick and tired of putting up with him, and they banish him from Philadelphia in December of 1781. And said, if you like the British so much, go stay with them. Out of Pittsburgh, we have American George Morgan. He is running the American spy operation out there. He sends Paul Long in May of '76 to Fort Niagara. Paul Long is actually discovered. He's interrogated, but he has no incriminating documents on him. So they can't convict him of anything, so they eventually just kick him out of the fort and tell him not to return. Morgan himself went as a spy at Fort Detroit in October of '76, and when I was reading his intelligence report that he filed, I thought I was reading about F-Troop. Here he's reporting that the British, in the celebration of a victory, they fired off the cannons of the fort, at which point the guardhouse fell down. That's why I said I felt like I was reading about F-Troop. I asked a friend of mine who worked at Fort Niagara, why did this happen? What's going on? And he goes, believe it or not, it's a common occurrence on the forts on the frontier that the guardhouses collapse. Anybody have an idea why? Huh?
No engineers.
No, not the vibration.
No engineers.
No, they have plenty of engineers. They're well built. Termites. They ate the supports off the guard towers. Guard towers need to be replaced every 10 years. And if you don't replace them, that's what happens. Just enough concussion from the cannon caused it to collapse. Now, some more spies in the frontiers, David Zeisberg and John Eckenwalder. They are Moravian missionaries, and they are American spies in Ohio with connections reporting back to Fort Pitt. How do we know that they were spies? They wrote it down in a letter 20 years later and admitted they were spies for the Americans. Don't usually get that from Moravian missionaries. Simon Gertie, he was a loyalist spy, operating out of Fort Detroit, coming down towards Fort Pitt. Now, Simon Gertie could neither read nor write, so his brother Thomas, who was in Fort Pitt, would gather the intelligence, place it in a dead drop in a tree. Thomas would pick up the messages and take it to a good friend of his to read it to him. The only problem was Thomas's friend was an American spy, who would then bring back the intelligence back to Fort Pitt as to everything going out. You can't make some of this stuff up. So So if you want to be a spy, make sure you can read and write. It's helpful. For those of you who have not heard of Simon Gerty, he is known as the White Savage. And how many of you remember a book or a movie called The Devil and Daniel Webster? There's a trial in the book, in the movie. And they call up the 12 worst characters in history, one of whom is Simon Gerty. So you can see what he was really thought of. Henry Bowlby, also spelt the Times Baby, is a British spy. And Dr. John Connolly out of Pittsburgh is just a pain in the behind of everybody, always trying to instigate some way of overturning the American operation. Now, we have a situation where the French and the Spanish get involved in the war, and then we have the League of Armed Neutrality get involved. I always love that, the League of Armed Neutrality, which means the Dutch, the Russians, they're all declaring war on England at the same time. Well, British now needs to get troops down to the Caribbean to protect their Caribbean islands, which is where their money is coming from, the sugar islands. They get more money and profit out of those than they do out of our 13 colonies. So they pull troops out of New York. So they figure that at this point, really, there's no way they're going to win the war because the armies here are just conducting a defensive position. So they figure they're going to try and work on winning the peace. So what they need to do that is they need to contact and get people in Congress working for them. One of the people they contact is Samuel Livermore of New Hampshire. He was in Congress in 1780 and 82. He was the former Royal Attorney General of New Hampshire from 1769 to 1764, which is where he made all his money on his appointment from the Crown. So they're figuring that, you know, he still owes them something for all the money they helped him get. So they contact him, send a Captain William Vance down to get the intelligence. The intelligence that he actually was able to pass was common knowledge that you could have gotten from anybody on the street. He was not in a position to get anything of any military value. Also, I did not find anything where he introduced any bills or actions that really were detrimental to the American movement. The next one they turn to is John Sullivan. John Sullivan is the same one who went up into New York to attack the Indians. He starts out, he's in Congress in 74 and 75, decides he hasn't had enough of that, he goes out and decides to be general for 5 years, just started that, decided to go back to Congress, and he is actually on the French payroll. Everybody in Philadelphia knew he was getting paid by the French government. And basically was to push the French position whenever he could. His brother, Captain Daniel Sullivan, is captured. He is initially put on the prison ships, and he's then taken off the prison ships to arrange his exchange. He goes down to see his brother, and he is told to try and get his brother to come over to the British side, and there's some negotiations going on. However, two things happen. In October, he dies and Cornwallis surrenders at Yorktown, and nothing seems to actually have ever gotten any farther at that. With his brother out of the picture, Sullivan just doesn't seem to have any interest in dealing with the British. So that never seems to have gotten anywhere. And that's the current book that's out. There actually is 130 spies in the book. There's an index, and there's a second index, which is just an index of spies. There is also a chapter called Philadelphia and New York Commuters, and it deals with New York and Philadelphia spies who are busy running back and forth across New Jersey. My first book was called Rebellion in the Ranks, Mutinies of the American Revolution. the American Revolution, published in 2007. He had also, the bulk of the book deals with the mutiny on January 1st, 1781, here at Morristown. And it also identifies all 6 British spies that were sent out. Van Doren's book, Mutiny in January, published in 1941, had 4 of the 6, and then he guessed the 2 remaining ones, and unfortunately he guessed wrong. I also go with the Connecticut Line Mutiny here at Morristown as well. My second book is called Invisible Ink, Spycraft in the American Revolution. CIA Intelligence Officer's Bookshelf, which is a CIA magazine. Volume 54, number 2, lists Invisible Ink, Spycraft in the American Revolution as so-called suggested reading for all agents and analysts. That I did not know I was writing their textbook form, but hopefully they buy it and not just take it out of the library. And I have all the books here for sale, and now I'll throw it out to questions. Yes?
Could you tell us a little more about Spootsman's spying activities? He eventually became head of Continental Commerce.
He was in the commissary department. Both armies like to hide their expenses for spies in the commissary bills, because the auditors really couldn't track it. Outside of Philadelphia, he was picking up intelligence from different people. When he was making his rounds and forwarding it on to Washington, there's one reference about a female spy who delivered a message to him in her a little pocketbook with the message rolled up like a pipe stem. He gets involved more here in New Jersey. But yeah, he's a case agent. He's running a few spies. Nothing significant other than that one, which gets involved with the Battle of White Marsh as well. So some more confirmation information. Anybody else? Yes? Yes, he is. Now, Sullivan didn't have any money, okay? And he was basically taking money from what would be considered today a French lobbyist. And everybody in Congress knew he needed the money because he wasn't getting it from the state and he didn't have it on his own. He tried in a couple instances at the very beginning of the war. Peter Lobbyist had tried to entice him into coming over to the British through the use of sending a spy down with a message in the double-bottom canteen. And the ploy was to send back a positive response to Canada. The only problem is that General Howe in New York got wind of the fact that the spy with the double-bottom canteen was captured. So the British then realized the positive response from Sullivan in that instance, was a red herring. It was not true. So his brother in '81 was going back telling these whopper tales that his brother had read his message 30 times, and wailing and gnashing of teeth and all this. Stories that obviously are not true. How far he was willing to go, we don't know, but he had contacted again the French and told them about the fact that he'd been contacted about his brother and by the British, and he was going to try and play the same rouse with them that he did earlier on in the war, and then his brother dies and nothing ever happens.
One more question.
Yes?
Did you come across anything about Margaret Kimball being a spy up in Boston?
Who?
Margaret Kimball?
Kimball?
Yes.
He was a case agent running spies.
Possibly his sister, Peter Kimball's daughter?
No. I've not found anything for him. No, he was working in the headquarters office, And he was handling British spies that were going out and collecting their intelligence for General Howe. He did not go out as a spy, but there are, spies that would have reported back to him.
And what about the intelligence to Benedict Arnold when he was in Philadelphia? What kind of connections and spying into Shipton and all that kind of stuff was there?
That would take about another hour.
That's what I mean. I was surprised his name didn't show up.
He's covered in the book, only that the spy in the trader's correspondence starts in Philadelphia. The end of it is up in West Point. There is more to the Benedict Arnold conspiracy than has ever been published. It's one of my projects, but it's just gonna.
We take front and center in that story.
Yeah, it's just the problem is that I've got so much to do, I don't know which one to do next. Okay.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? John will be in the back selling the books, so if you have any questions. Two things. One, I have a pad floating around for history data. Please sign. If you've never made it, please sign name. Justin Moretti just wants to make a statement on the park department.
I just want to thank the Princeton Battlefield Society for presenting some information on the public current events. But just as a quick disclaimer, the National Park Service does not endorse nor denounce the
And finally, we end the night off Mr. Clyde Borshammer with the trivia questions.
Wake up, everybody.
Oh, Candy.
Now, you're all here because you presumably have a keen interest in our American history and a curiosity particularly about the American Revolution and the genesis of our nation. So tonight I'm going to try a different, more subjective approach in my trivia questions. In a timeline form, I'm going to ask you how one side or the other reacted to acts of provocation from almost the beginning of the relationship between the British Crown and the American colonies. The issues covered in these questions and answers represents probably the least that you should know about the causes of the war which ended in our independence. This is more subjective than the usual yes or no or maybe numbers answers that I usually ask for. In 1767, that's a good 8 years before the onset of hostilities, Parliament imposed upon the colonies the Townshend Acts, which among other irritating conditions imposed taxes on the importation from England of 5 products: lead, glass, tea, paper, and paint. How did the colonists respond to this? Boycott is exactly right. They boycotted all British goods. You should know that. When did the Crown first send occupying troops to the Massachusetts colony in response to acts of civil unrest? Any idea? 68. In October of 68, when 4 regiments of British regulars arrived in Boston. How did the colonists respond to the troops? Well, there was an act called the Quartering Act. Okay. And what the colonists simply did is, you're not going to quarter into my house, and I absolutely refused to quarter the troops. Okay. Confrontations between the colonists and the military were frequent, bitter, and sometimes violent. What was the culminating event of these encounters? The Boston Massacre, the so-called Boston Massacre, which incidentally was probably provoked by the citizens. Okay, the Boston Massacre occurred on March 5th, 1770, so you can see how things are progressing. The soldiers and their commander involved in the massacre were tried for murder by a civilian court, which was in itself a rather unusual event because the British allowed that. In any event, they were tried in a civilian court. What was the result of that trial? That's exactly right. They were almost all acquitted. Okay, all were acquitted of the murder charge, Only 2 were found guilty of lesser charges, and the penalty for that was branding on the thumb, I think. Okay. But public opinion at this time, fed by the thought of locals being cut down by hostile occupying troops, began to turn public opinion against the British. Now, in 1773, in the midst of the Crown's reimposition of a tax on tea, the British East India Company, which had a glut of some 17 million pounds of surplus tea in its warehouses, turned to the British government to force the sale of the tea on the colonists. 3 ships full of tea arrived in Boston. How did the colonists respond to that? No, not yet. What they did do was absolutely refuse to unload the tea. And the British governor at that point said, oh yes, we're going to unload the tea. So there was an impasse at that point. And the local council forbade the unloading of the tea. The royal governor then refused to back down and refused to let the ships leave. Then what happened? The Boston Tea Party, where people dressed as Indians wore the Dartmouth and threw all the tea in the harbor. Why did the British government focus its anger on Boston, you might ask? Because there was some rebellion in other parts of the colonies at that time. Anybody know? Because the British Boston colonists seemed the most rebellious and the most vocal. The Tea Party was a blatant challenge to Crown authority that had to be answered. The port of Boston was then closed by the British for all commerce, and 4,000 more troops under General Thomas Gage were sent to enforce the King's will. Just a couple more, no, 3 more. How did the colonies respond to Britain's newest acts of force? No, that didn't happen yet, not quite. That's right, yes, that was true. But they now were motivated to send committees of safety locally, but they said they decided to have a Continental Congress, the first Continental Congress, so they all sent representatives. The response was important in that the colonies now began to think in collective terms in the realization that all of them were going to be affected, not just Bostonians. Was independence from England the original intent of the First Continental Congress? No. Most, except for the Massachusetts contingent, were moderate and loyalists with no thought of separating from the mother country. The idea of independence evolved only gradually, fed by reasoning and by continuing provocative acts by Great Britain. Last question. When word of the convening of the First Congress reached the King and Parliament in January of 1775, how did those 2 entities react? What did they say or do? Well, they were both stung by the insolence of the colonies, and both entities resolved that the insurgents must be forced into submission, and the fat was in the fire.
Again, thank you. Just going to give a disclaimer. I'm doing an income tax now. We just paid a quarterly tax. I would have gone with 2 cents a pound.